Hello guys, how's it going? So I recently finished reading all of the Bronte sisters' 7 novels, so I wanted to do a video here kind of talking about them with you. The Bronte sisters are some of my favorite authors, and they also happen to be some of the most influential authors when it comes to English literature. Now, if you are at the C1 advanced or C2 proficient level of English, reading classic literature can be a fantastic way to take your language skills to the next level. So we are going to go through the 7 novels. I'm going to rank them from my least favorite to my most favorite. But before we get started on that, I want to just share a little bit of background on who the Bronte sisters are. So when we're talking about the Bronte sisters, we are usually referring to Charlotte, Emily, and Anne Brontë. However, they actually had 2 other sisters and a brother. The Bronte family lived in a small town called Haworth in Yorkshire, England in the 1800s. Their father was a minister, and the family lived in something called a parsonage. A parsonage was like a small home that was provided by the church for the minister and his family to live in, and this was typically next to the church and the town cemetery. Now, life in Haworth was quite difficult. This small village suffered from harsh winters, poverty, poor sanitation, and disease. The girls grew up around a lot of illness and loss, and we can really see how these experiences impacted their writing and how the themes they portrayed in their novels. Now, Haworth was a small town. There wasn't a lot to do there, so the sisters spent a lot of their free time walking along the surrounding moors. And this atmosphere is famous for influencing the sisters' work, especially Wuthering by Emily Bronte. Another way that the girls would pass the time was making up stories with their brother as children. They created fictional worlds and wrote stories and poems, and this was the beginning of their journey as writers. Eventually, the 3 sisters wrote serious novels and pursued professional careers as writers. However, because it was hard for female writers to find success at this time, the 3 sisters used male pseudonyms. Charlotte originally published her work under the name Currer Bell, Emily as Ellis Bell, and Anne as Acton Bell. So they were kind of seen as 3 brothers, even though they were really 3 sisters. Now let's get into the novels. As I said, there are 7 total. We have Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, Jane Eyre, Villette, The Professor and Shirley by Charlotte Bronte, and then Agnes Grey and the Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Brontë. Now, just a disclaimer before I get started, I really enjoyed all 7 of these novels, so even though I'm starting from my least favorite, I still think my least favorite is good. Okay, now I'm gonna get started on the novels. These are just hard to open. Coming in at number 7, we have Agnes Grey by Anne Brontë. This was actually Anne's first novel. The story follows Agnes Grey, who is the daughter of an impoverished clergyman. In order to relieve her parents of the financial burden of caring for her, Agnes decides to pursue work as a governess. A governess at the time was a position where you would work for a family to care for and educate their child or children. It was typically a position where you would receive housing, you would live together with the family, and then also receive a small salary. In the story, we see Agnes caring for these wealthy and very spoiled children as she seeks her own purpose and happiness. The author Anne Brontë actually worked as a governess for a time, and so she clearly drew on her own experiences when writing this novel. When I think of the 3 sisters, I kind of think of Emily as being very gothic, Anne as being very much with realism, and then Charlotte is kind of in the middle with aspects of both. So this novel is way different from Wuthering Heights, which tends to be the Bronte sisters' most famous novel, so you might have read Wuthering Heights before. If you're getting into Agnes Grey though, don't expect it to be anything like that. It is a totally different feel to it. Now, as I said, this is my least favorite of the Bronte sisters novels, but I still really did like it. I think the reason why I put it in last place, or maybe for 2 reasons. One is because I think the experience of this woman that has grown up or is kind of experiencing poverty and seeks work as a governess to kind of find a better life and provide for herself, this felt like a kind of an idea and a storyline that was already dealt with, but in a more complex and fleshed out way in Jane Eyre. And so I felt like that we already had that in a Bronte sisters book, even though it was written by her sister. And this just didn't feel as complex, I think, as for example, Jane Eyre. And then the other reason is the children in this book that she cares for. There's especially one of the characters I just felt was unbearable, like such a bratty little kid. So I think I got so frustrated with the child that I was like, oh, this made me maybe like this story less than the other ones. But again, it's a great story. I think if you've already read Jane Eyre, it might seem a little bit overlapping in some ways, but again, it's a different author, and so it's much more realism. Jane Eyre has some more kind of gothic aspects to it. So it is different, but I think that's kind of just my reasoning for why I put it in last place. All right, next on the list we have The Professor by Charlotte Bronte. This was Charlotte's first novel, however, it did not find success during her lifetime. She actually had a very hard time trying to get The Professor published. It was rejected over and over again, and eventually she ended up creating a more complex, kind of fleshed out version of The Professor, which was Villette. So you'll see lots of similarities between The Professor and Villette. Villette is just a much longer, much more complex kind of version, but you'll see a lot of kind of similarities in the plot between the two. However, Charlotte always defended this story, and she said even though it was often rejected by publishers, she stood by it and really believed it to be a good story, and I really enjoyed it as well. This is a very short story, as you can see. This one and Agnes Grey, I think, are the two shortest of the Bronte sisters novels. And in this one, uniquely, we have a main character who is a man instead of a woman. It's the only one of the Bronte sisters novels who has a male main character. Our main character in this story is named William, and he leaves England to become an English teacher for French-speaking students in Belgium. And there he builds an independent career and eventually finds love as well. This story felt a bit lighter than the other Bronte sisters novels, but I really enjoyed it. I think one of the reasons why I connected with it so much is just because of my own personal experience, since I am living and working in Brazil, which is not my country of origin, and I am kind of doing everyday life in Portuguese, which is a second language for me, while English being my native language, and I'm an English teacher. And so I think I really kind of the character of William and his kind of lifestyle and his choices, I think, really resonated with me because of that. We're both English teachers living in another country and speaking another language in day-to-day life, so that was fun. One thing that I really enjoy in Charlotte Bronte's novels as well is the kind of bilingual aspect. So in The Professor and also in some of her other novels, you'll see that she mixes in some French. Sometimes that's translated, so a lot of times it's not. So you might have to have a dictionary or translation app or something nearby, depending on how familiar you are with French. But I thought that brought a really special touch to this novel in particular. All right, and next up we have Shirley by Charlotte Bronte. This is actually the last of the novels that I read by the Bronte sisters, so I just finished this one the other day. This novel took me, I think, the longest to get into. I felt like it kind of felt slow in the beginning, and honestly throughout the whole thing, I really liked this book. I just felt like it was very slow moving. The story is set in the Industrial Revolution, and we follow Caroline and her friend Shirley as they seek purpose and fulfillment in a time where there weren't a lot of opportunities for women. Charlotte is reserved and gentle. She has lost her parents and really doesn't have a lot of financial stability, whereas Shirley is kind of her polar opposite. Shirley is feisty and very confident and actually wealthy, which was uncommon for a single woman at the time. Supposedly, Charlotte based these two characters on her sisters, so people say that Caroline was based on Anne Brontë and Shirley was based on Emily Brontë. I thought this story was really unique compared to the other Bronte sisters novels, because typically the other novels by Emily and Anne, and even the other novels by Charlotte, tend to be more kind of domestic novels, and this one had kind of a domestic storyline, but there were also, it dealt with a lot of social issues that I didn't see as kind of obvious in the other novels. As I said, the story is set in the Industrial Revolution, and one of the characters in the story is named Robert, and he is the owner of a mill. Now, there's lots of new technology kind of coming up at the time, and in an attempt to keep up with competition, Robert starts investing in new machinery for his mill. However, the machinery is going to be much more efficient and productive and profitable for his business, and so he doesn't need as many workers anymore, and so he ends up laying off a lot of employees. This results in riots, it results in violence, and a lot of poverty. And there's a lot of kind of social unrest that is occurring now in the area because of all this kind of industrialization that's happening. I think reading this now in 2026 felt so relevant because of the explosion of AI and all the conversations that are going around about jobs and kind of insecurity about jobs and what's going to happen with new technology. And I think it's just so interesting how a novel that was written, you know, in the 1800s can be speaking to a topic that still comes up today. I thought this novel was very balanced. It's very political, but I think that Charlotte Bronte did a great job of being fair. She presented multiple sides for the issues that she was talking about. And although I think in some ways it might be obvious what her opinions are, I think she still did a good job of kind of allowing the reader to make their own decisions about what they consider or think would be right in each situation. This novel surprised me. I didn't expect to like it as much as I did, especially considering kind of all the social commentary and the kind of social issues that it was mentioning. I thought I would like more just kind of the more domestic part of the story, but I think this was really well done. It is a big book, and as I said, it was a very slow read for me, but still I really enjoyed it and have placed it at number 5. All right, in 4th place, I have Villette by Charlotte Bronte. So as I said before, this story was actually kind of started off being The Professor, and then Charlotte Bronte had a lot of difficulty getting the story published, and so she created a kind of more fleshed out, more complex version of the novel, which was Villette. So in this story though, however, if you remember, I said The Professor has a male main character. In this story, our main character is named Lucy Snow. In the story, Lucy Snow moves to a fictional French-speaking town, which is called Villette, to work as an English teacher. This is a darker story and is often considered Charlotte Bronte's most psychologically sophisticated novel. The main character, Lucy Snow, experiences loneliness, grief, and emotional isolation. And although she's never actually diagnosed with anything in the novel, especially because a lot of the terms that we use today didn't even exist at the time, a lot of readers will interpret the experiences that she goes through in the story as being consistent with clinical depression. One of the most famous sections in this novel is when Lucy goes on a long vacation, and we see her experience this profound emotional and mental crisis. Now, as I said, Charlotte never actually calls it depression, but it is one of the earliest and most convincing fictional portrayals of depression in literature. The story also has an unreliable narrator. So Lucy, our main character and narrator, she often kind of leaves out these very important parts of the story, and I found myself several times as I was reading this, kind of getting to a certain point in the story and realizing, oh my gosh, why didn't Lucy mention that earlier? Like, this would have helped me understand, different things that were going on in a different way. So that was kind of on a more lighthearted note. It was kind of funny to read and be like, oh, she kind of tricked me there, So I thought that was really interesting as well. In 3rd place, we have Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I think this is probably the most famous of the Bronte sisters novels, but also, in my opinion, it's one of the most misunderstood novels by them. A lot of times I hear this kind of be described as this amazing romantic novel, or, it's this beautiful romance. And I think it's actually, there are romantic relationships in the story, but the meat of the story is actually so much more. I think there's so much more to the story, and it's actually about some really serious themes that go further beyond just love and romance itself. Now, in the story, we have Thrushcross Grange and Wuthering Heights. These are two kind of like houses, big estates that are neighboring. And the story starts off with a man called Mr. Lockwood, who is beginning to rent Thrushcross Grange, and he goes to visit Wuthering Heights. And when he's there, he meets a woman named Nellie, who has worked for years as a housekeeper for both households, and she kind of starts to tell him the gossip and kind of the story of what the background is for these two households. Now, the two families that lived in these neighboring estates were the Earnshaws, who lived in Wuthering Heights, and the Lintons, who lived in Thrushcross Grange. And then most of the story is told from the perspective of Nellie, the housekeeper, as she's kind of telling this new tenant, Mr. Lockwood, about what all has happened. She starts off by talking about how there was an orphan orphan boy named Heathcliff who was brought into Wuthering Heights and was raised kind of alongside the Earnshaw children. And one of the Earnshaw children was named Catherine. So one of the, some of the most famous characters in literature are Heathcliff and Catherine Earnshaw. So they were actually raised as siblings. And eventually they developed this kind of very passionate, intense relationship. The story follows multiple generations, and we see this kind of cycle of abuse that happens from one generation to the next. Now, in this story, you have several characters with the same name. So I think one of the most important things to kind of do when you're reading the story, if you haven't read it yet, is to keep track of the characters in some way. So if you've got a character map or something, that can be really useful to help you keep track of who is who. Now, one of the things that I love about this book is all of these hidden gems. So you have these kind of details that maybe if you're not familiar with the culture and the customs of the time, you may not pick up on these details, and I think they bring this whole other level to the story. So this is one that I would definitely recommend reading more than once as well. And if you're in my book club, we are gonna have a course on the Bronte sisters, and we'll actually be diving into Wuthering Heights and 2 other Bronte sisters novels in the course, and we'll be talking about all of these details. Now, when Emily first wrote this novel, it was not well received. It was condemned as being very violent and immoral, but nowadays it is seen as one of the greatest and most psychologically innovative novels of English literature. So definitely very, very good. I highly recommend this one if you haven't read it yet. All right, now second and first place. This was such a hard decision for me. I love both of these books, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte and The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Brontë, so much, and this is a really hard choice. I think these are honestly my top 2 favorite books of all time, not even just talking about the Bronte sisters. So very, very good books, but I've made my choice. However, if you ask me like a week from now or a month from now, I might flip-flop what I put in first and second place. So just a quick disclaimer there. All right, I think this might surprise some people, but in second place, I have Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This story is so good. I think probably one of my favorite characters in literature is Jane Eyre herself. It's so beautiful, so well written, and just such an engaging story. And this book was actually an immediate success at the time. It was hugely popular among readers, although some people said that it was kind of morally shocking because of how independent and emotionally intense the main character, Jane Eyre, was or is. So in this story, we follow our main character, Jane Eyre, from childhood to adulthood. So she starts off as an impoverished orphan, and then as an adult, she kind of seeks a way to provide for herself and eventually finds work as a governess. She works as a governess at Thornfield Hall, which is owned by this mysterious man called Mr. Rochester. Now this story is split up into kind of 3 sections. So you start off with Jane's childhood, and then you move to her time as a governess at Thornfield Hall, and then you have her adult life after she leaves Thornfield Hall. And I thought that the pacing of this story was excellent. I loved the kind of constant change of environment and other characters that are like kind of side characters, etc. I felt like that made the story really interesting. But at the same time, Charlotte really gets us like directly into Jane's mind. So we have this really kind of deep psychological connection with the main character as she is experiencing life through all these different seasons and different environments and connections with different people. And Jane herself is a character that I just admire and respect so much. I think I just felt so much like affection for her and love for her as a character because she's someone that has suffered so much throughout her entire life, from childhood all the way up through her entire adult life. She's just someone that has experienced so much suffering, but at the same time, she always stays true to herself. And there are these really kind of important moments throughout the story where she has this opportunity to kind of take the easy way out, and she could make a choice that would maybe be easier for her and like finally give her a little bit of relief in her life, but she's so true to herself and true to what she believes and kind of her morals, and so she makes those decisions that are hard to kind of be consistent with what she believes is the right thing. And I think that just made me admire her so much as a character, and yeah, I think Charlotte just did a fantastic job of really allowing us us to connect with Jane and kind of be inspired by her and, you know, just grow close to her as she kind of goes through these different seasons of life. So wonderful, wonderful story. I could not recommend this more. As I said, this one and the next book that I'm going to talk about, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, they are my top 2 favorite books of all time. It's hard to pick between the two. Today I'm putting Jane Eyre in second place, but as I said, if you ask me a month from now or something, I might say Jane Eyre is in first place and The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is second place. So 2 very, very loved books. All right, and then in first place we have The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Brontë. So this is another one that surprised me. I did not expect to love this book as much as I did. I think honestly just because it's not as famous. I hadn't heard about it as much. I think when you hear about the Bronte sisters, Wuthering Heights is, I think, the most famous of them all, and then Jane Eyre is another one that I hear about a lot. But The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, I didn't really know what to expect when I was getting into it, but I thought it was so well written, and again, I think it's another character that I just really, really loved. So this book uses a frame narrative, so we have kind of like a story inside of a story. I really like this format. It's written with, it's also written with letters and diary entries, so it's like frame narrative and also an epistolary novel. And this is very similar, kind of the format reminded me a lot of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, which is kind of the same idea. It's written through letters and kind of a story inside of a story, etc. I think that was a really enjoyable style of book for me to read. I really, really enjoyed that. And I also think it made it a lot easier to understand, kind of keeping track when you have, you know, the letters or diary entries, etc. So I think that honestly just helped with comprehension as well. The story follows this mysterious woman who suddenly moves to a place called Wildfell Hall with her young son. And she goes there, she moves there by herself, which was uncommon for the time. So this kind of mysterious woman shows up, she has her son with her, and she doesn't have a husband or, you know, even like an uncle or father or someone that's taking care of her. And this was very strange at the time to have a woman appearing kind of by herself, and especially with a child. And when she arrives to this small town, and Wildfell Hall specifically there, this kind of sets off a lot of town gossip. So everybody is kind of guessing at who she is, what's happened, what's her background, what's her story, where'd she come from, etc. And so the beginning of the story, you kind of see all the townspeople trying to figure out who she is. And then throughout the story, her past is revealed. I don't want to say too much to not give spoilers, but I think it's just very interesting as we kind of see and discover the truth about who this woman is. Now, this was a very bold story for the Victorian era because it dealt with really serious themes that people didn't necessarily want to talk about at the time. So it deals with things like abuse and alcoholism. And we see this main character who is very independent and very brave and does things that would have not been considered, socially correct at the time. Now, I don't want to say too much more about this story because, as I said, I don't want to give spoilers. And I think there's some fun kind of plot twists in this one. Jane Eyre also has some good plot twists in it. So I don't want to say too much more about this story, but it's very, very good. As you can tell, I've placed it number 1 today, maybe next month number 2, but The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is wonderful, and I think the author, Anne Brontë, is way underrated. She is a fantastic author, and especially this novel in particular is so well done, so I highly, highly recommend this. All right, well, my hope is that I have inspired you to check out at least one of the Bronte sisters novels. As you can tell, I definitely have my favorites, but I think all 7 of these novels are fantastic, and you really can't go wrong if you choose to read any of them. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you do. Here at Inglés No Hora, we talk all about advanced English. So that will include literature, as we're talking about today, for advanced English learners, but also things like pronunciation, phrasal verbs, other vocabulary, grammar, etc. All at the advanced level. And if you're interested in studying even more with me, I've got several options for courses and specifically a book club. As I mentioned before, we're gonna have a new course coming out soon for our book club on the Bronte sisters, where where we will be digging in deeply into The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, Jane Eyre, and Wuthering Heights, my top 3 favorite Bronte sisters novels. And we'll be going into kind of more context on the sisters themselves and other kind of historical and cultural details that will help you understand and appreciate those novels even more. So make sure you check that out here in the caption below as well. All right, thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.